Well, thanks very much for inviting me to talk about Cape Arago. So I'm going to concentrate on the wildlife. I'm not going to talk about much about what sea does because they can do that. But I can say that it's that your work that you do out in Cape Arago has been fundamental in making my life so much better, as I don't get a lot of telephone calls about things. You answer those questions, which is really great. So we'll start sort of with the big picture. All of the rocks off of Oregon are part of the Oregon Islands National Wildlife Refuge. There's a lot of them, and the Cape Arago rocks are part of them. It's a wildlife area. It's also a wilderness area, and all of the rocks are closed to any kind of human access to protect what's there. And it's primarily nesting birds and marine mammals. So we're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about those. The wildlife refuge is, as I said, an important place for nesting. It's a place where sea lions and seals come out to breed and to rest. It's also something that we will not see today because you have to go out there at low tide and get down low. But it's a place where there are an incredible diversity of animals that live there between the tides, between the high and low tides. And actually, some of them have some very unique terrestrial plants that are on these islands. But again, we won't talk about those today because you don't see those with the spotting scope. North Cove of Cape Arago, which is where Simpson's Reef and Shell Island are, is one of those places. It's not a big nesting area. The most important animal or bird that nests there are the oyster catchers, which we'll see in a moment. But it is a very important place for seals and sea lions to come out onto land. Some breed there, others just rest there. I like to think of it as sort of the Serengeti of Oregon. You can drive your car, you can park, you can stand out, and in August and September, you can see maybe 6,000 animals. Where else in Oregon can you do that, without major sort of work? The two places that are named out there are Simpson's Reef, which is the reef offshore, and Shell Island, which is that pointy thing with the sand in front of it. And those are two important places for the holdout sites for the seals and sea lions. So I'm going to spend quite a bit of time on seals and sea lions because that's what you see mostly out there. And so when Sea is interpreting, that's a lot of what they talk about. And there are 4 species that you can see out there, 2 seals and 2 sea lions. And we'll go into detail a little more on each of these. The 2 groups, seals and sea lions, are somewhat different. The seals are animals that swim with hind flippers back and forth. They don't have any little external ear flap. And we have 2 kinds. We have the elephant seal and the harbor seal. The annual cycle of the seal, so this is if you go out yearly and look at what's going on, is pretty much the same in the 2 species. They both give birth on land, although harbor seals can swim almost at birth. And the female then nurses the pup on land, and then she weans the pup. And that's a very short period. It only takes 3 to 4 weeks for that baby little seal to go from this size, or in a harbor seal, to a much fatter animal. Because mom has incredible milk. We're used to 4% cow milk. We're talking about 30 to 40% fat. So mom goes from being a real chubby to a much skinnier animal. Then she weans the animal. Essentially, she stops feeding it, and the pup becomes independent. There's no long-term bond between the 2. And you'll notice there's nothing said about there being any male involvement on this. Those kids' books you see with seal families, doesn't happen. But the male then comes into play. There's mating, it either happens in the water or on the land, depending on the species. And then there's a very long non-breeding period where they forage, go out into the ocean to feed. They come back to rest on land, and for a short period, depending on the species, they will actually molt because they have hair. They're mammals. And so they come on, they rest on land and they'll lose their hair. Here's the harbor seal. Very variable in color, spotted. The population in Oregon is pretty stable. They live about 30 years. You cannot tell the difference between males and females due to size. So when you're interpreting, don't keep talking about he is doing this. But when you talk about harbor seals, because it could be she is doing this, okay? Because you cannot tell. At Shell Island or at North Cove of Cape Arago, we have a big harbor seal haul out. There's what a pregnant seal looks like. But what is really exciting about that place now, didn't used to be 20 years ago, is because the trail to North Cove is closed, those female harbor seals really like to come much closer inshore. When I first came here, we only ever saw them out on the far Simpson Reef, giving birth. Now they pup in that. I'm standing here taking this picture at the lookout, and if you look down to the south, the nearshore rocks are where the pupping area is. And if you go out and pay attention and spend some time out there, which the sea volunteers do, you will see harbor seals be born, if you're lucky. And then you'll see the whole sort of net part of what happens. And you'll see them nursing. They have one pup a year, and this happens in April and May. So there's a good chance today when you go out, when the tide is low enough, which I think it will be, is it, or is that, no, it's going to be close to high tide. Anyhow, you should go out and look. And you may well see these animals, well, you will, they're there, you'll see them doing things. And as I say, the pup is nursed on land primarily, but it's also in the water, and after 3 to 4 weeks, it's on its own. In June and July, you don't see the mating in these animals because they mate in water. They defend underwater territories. We don't really know where those are in Coos Bay because we've never done any research here. They defend their territories using sound, and they probably attract females using sound. But we know very little about how that actually happens here. Most of the work on this kind of this information has been done in the Atlantic. They go to sea to forage, and they use their whiskers a lot. Harbor seals have very large whiskers, and the whiskers or the vibrissae are kind of rippled. You can see at the bottom there. And that allows them, when they are going towards a fish, whereas the fish moves its tail, it makes the water to move, and the harbor seal vibrissae are able to pick up that movement. And so they can follow a fish, and they often feed in at night. They don't need sight to feed. What do they eat? Now, half of your visitors will tell you how terrible it is that those seals eat all that salmon. But they don't. They eat a ton of stuff. They eat what's available. And all those red things are flatfish. So they eat a huge amount of different kind of flatfish. But you know, when the herring are in, they go eat herring. When the sand lance are there, they eat sand lance. They can get an octopus, they'll probably eat one of those too. So they eat a huge amount of stuff. How do we know that? Well, scientists and there's have gone out and they collect harbor seal poop, harbor seal scats, and you sieve it, you look at the little pieces, you look at the bones, but fish have ear bones that are species specific. So a salmon ear bone looks different than a sole ear bone. And you can look under a microscope and you can see the shape, and if you're, once you're good at doing that, you can say, yeah, that's a sand dab. No, and that's a butter sole. And so we know that that's how this kind of work has been done. So that's the harbor seals. Okay. And if you have questions, I'll take them at the end. So remember, if you have a question about harbor seal, to remind yourself. Let's go to the other seal that we get there. Not as common. This is the northern elephant seal. they are different from harbor seals in that males and females are, when they're adults, are different sizes. Males are way more bigger than females there. There's a lot of them, but we don't see very many of them at the North Cove. But we do see a few of them because about 20 years ago, a few animals, maybe about 20 or so, decided that the North Cove Shell Island particularly would be a good place for them to come breed. They made a serious error, as we will see. It was a stupid thing for them to do. They should have stayed further to the south where they are much more common. But what happens is in all of the elephant seal colonies is males come back to land in December. And unlike harbor seals, which mate in the water, these guys set up their mating area on land. And they make a dominance hierarchy. In other words, only big males get to breed. So if you're an elephant seal, 90% of the elephant seal males never get to breed. 5 to 10% do. They set up their hierarchy using physical strength where they beat on each other, or they make some really loud sounds, which you, on a good calm day at Cape Arago, you can actually hear. But when there's waves, it's hard to hear that. So the males come back, they're on the beach, and then the females come in, and the first thing, within a couple of days, the females give birth. They return in late December through into January. Again, they have a single pup, and they nurse that pup on land. So in December, January, if it's calm at Cape Arago, which I think is kind of an oxymoron, then the pup will be nursing from a female, and the pup, like the harbor seals, very rich milk. The pup will grow from that skinny little black thing you see up there into that fat black thing that you see attached to a mom. It takes about 4 weeks. Then the males are still there, and the males, if on a big colony, the males would be guarding the females. There'd be lots of interaction. They'd be beating on each other and roaring. That doesn't happen much at Cape Arago because it's rarely more than 1 or 2 males. But the male hangs around because he knows the female will become receptive, and they will mate. The female then leaves. Unlike the harbor seal, the elephant seal pup, because physiologically it has grown so fast, it has to stay on land for about another 4-6 weeks or so to turn all of that fat into muscle so that it can go and swim in the ocean. So the pup remains on the beach. They'll start to make little forays into the water, but much of the time they'll just lie on the beach. This is what Cape Arago looks like in the winter. All it needs to happen is we need a few storms, and those pups, because they're on land for such a long time, 8-10 weeks, they just don't survive. They're washed off. It's very rare. We've had a few survive, we'll have a couple of those winters where we all go, whoa, hasn't it been nice this winter? But all you need in January when those pups are little are one big storm and they're a goner. But we have had a few survive, and we've tagged a few of them. And we've actually had one return that we know of. It was a fortuitous time, and it was a 5-year, when I saw it, it was a 5-year-old female that came back. She was back on Cape Arago, on Shell Island. But I only know of that one. But the rest of them, in good colonies, so in Central California, for example, at Año Nuevo, where lots of them breed, only 50% of the pups that leave the beach to go out come back next year. So 50% of them die, get eaten, So our colony is, I call it as an example of what in ecology you would call a sink population. It's not giving any genetic material to the species. And actually of late, I have noticed that numbers of elephant seals coming back has been declining. So whether, these kind of places, they peak and then they decline, and maybe it'll not happen for a few years. Who knows? We'll just have to see what's going on. But we do see, when they go to sea, they are, I mean, we don't obviously see this at Cape Arago, but they are remarkable animals. These are tracks of animals that are leaving the Central California colonies. The red ones are the males, and you can see they swim all the way up into Alaska. The yellow ones are females. They swim more out into the open ocean, and of course, they're swimming out there to forage. We have learned a lot about these animals because of the research done at UC Santa Cruz, where they instrument these animals. They put so many things on them. They put trackers for depth. They put trackers how often they open their mouths. They put satellite tags on them. It's just pretty amazing what we know about them. And what we know is they spend about 9%, 95% of their time underneath the water. They averagely dive to 1,500 feet. They can stay down for 90 minutes. They come to the surface for 2 minutes on average. That's why you never see them at sea. They can go as deep as a mile. And so they're foraging in areas that no other seal or sea lion forages. So they're eating those deep sea things. And of course, they have remarkable physiological adaptations, which we don't have time to go into today, to see what they have. So they are pretty amazing. So here's an example of the annual cycle of these animals. So this is a male. He's leaving after breeding. He's done finally. He swims all the way up to Alaska. He feeds. His track is there. He feeds for about 6 weeks or so up there, and then he swims all the way back to California because he needs to molt. And elephant seals, harbor seals don't do this. Harbor seals just shed like we do, just hair here and there. But these animals, they're kind of like elk in a way, I think. They come back, they lie around on land for about 3 to 4 weeks, and their entire upper layer of skin and all the hair just gets shed. So you can imagine this is a time when we get a fair number of calls about these dying animals on the beach. They're not dying, they don't move. You have to be careful when you're walking if there's a lot of debris around, you don't think they're along. They're just resting. They don't feed, they don't need little packets of herring next to them. They just are there. And they're just going through this physiological thing, and they come out looking beautiful. Look how like gray, lovely skin is. And this happens. We don't see the males so much. But we do see them molting on Shell Island. Unfortunately, the 1-year-olds tend to forget where they came from, and they come up and down all over the beach. So if you see them, you can advise people what they are doing. Now that male's molted, and he needs to bulk up again because maybe he'll be the next breeder. And he leaves again, and he goes back up to a similar area, probably not, we don't really know if it's quite the same area, but he goes back up to a similar area off of Alaska in September. He'll feed for another couple of months, then he'll come back in December for the breeding season. So he goes about 12,500 miles every year. So they spend a lot of time in the water. They go a long distance. So here's the annual cycle. This is what you would see out at the North Cove, Cape Arago. Winter breeding, weaned pups still around in March and April. They molt. They have a different animals come back at different times to molt. And so you'll see littler ones out in May. If the males do come back, you'll see them in July. And then in the late fall, the juveniles tend to just come back. They're done. They just kind of hole out and hang around for a while. And that's what you might see at Cape Arago, but we're not seeing huge numbers. And one of the problems with seeing them, of course, is there are so many other animals out there. So if you're looking for elephant seals, pretty much the only place that you see them is Shell Island is here, the sand is at the front, and very close to the back where the sand and the rock meet, they often hang out right in there. But they're and you do, I mean, you can see them, but you never see more than maybe 10, 15 if you're lucky. So those are the seals. Now we're going to look at the sea lions that are out there. The sea lions are slightly different. They're able to turn their back legs underneath their bodies, and they can actually sort of walk. It's sort of like you walking with your pants around your ankles, you just kind of back and forth. But it does mean that they are able to use places at Cape Arago that are different than the harbor seals. The harbor seals can only kind of inchworm out. The sea lions can climb up onto areas. And that makes them have a much larger area of habitat that they can use. They have the external ear flap, like most mammals do, but they swim with their fore flippers, not with their hind flippers. So they move their fore flippers kind of like a bird does for locomotion. They have strong, like elephant seals, they have strong sexual dimorphism. Males are much bigger than females when they're adults. Of course, you can't tell that when they're small animals. And they have a very different annual cycle. They give birth on land, but they have a much longer weaning period for their pups. The sea lion milk is much less rich, so it takes her longer to raise her pup. She'll nurse her pup on land for a short little period, and then she'll leave the pup and she'll go to sea to feed because she needs to replenish her milk stores. She'll return to feed the pup, then she'll go back and forth. The pup will get stronger. He might go to sea with her, but it's much more complicated. There's just lots more movement around. Mating occurs on land though, and it depends on the species, but it tends to be, of course, when they're all back together on land. So it's not long after she gives birth. And then eventually the pup will be weaned. And again, it depends on the species, and it also depends on the age of the mother, and whether sometimes the mother will have a pup that she hasn't yet weaned, and she'll have her new pup. So you'll see a pup that she's almost done weaning, but she'll have a brand new one. She's a good mom. She can have two. Other ones will wean their pup young, earlier because she needs to replenish her. So you can imagine. I mean, I don't like to anthropomorphize, but it's sort of like teenage pregnancies and for someone who's had 7 children or something like that. So it's variable. So you do see pups associated with females for a lot longer. But again, there's no male, other than mating, there's no male involvement in the pup at all. We have 2 sea lions that we will see at Cape Arago, the California sea lion and the Stellars, or the northern sea lion. They're reasonably easy to tell apart when they are dry. The California sea lion is a much darker animal. This is the one that makes the barking sound, that you hear out there. The stellar sea lion, when it's dry, is a much lighter animal. And you will hear them make sounds. They make more growling kind of sounds. And again, if it's a calm day, and there's a lot of them, you can hear them. There's a lot more California sea lions in the world than there are stellar sea lions. We have about 12,000 stellars in Oregon. We don't actually count the California sea lions that we have in Oregon. They don't. They migrate here. We'll look at what happens then in just a moment. Both species are found at Simpson's Reef year-round. They use whole different areas. They use the outer reef, they're on Shell Island, they're on the rocks to the north and south. The stellars, we get both species, females and males, and we do have a few pups that you'll see out there. And occasionally a pup will be born. But most of the pups, the stellars, breed a little bit to the south of us here, the reefs off of Port Orford and off of Gold Beach. Those are the big breeding areas for those animals. But a few pups have been born at Cape Arago. California sea lions, the majority of them are males, because they migrate here. We'll look at that in just a moment, but there will be a few females. But because of the sexual dimorphism, it is very difficult to tell, are you looking at a female or a young male? It's tricky, but I'm sure we have a few females out there. The California sea lions breed for north to the south of San Francisco. There's a lot of them. I think I actually got that wrong. What did I say? Yeah. 35, there's 350,000 individuals. I just looked that up. I should have changed that on there. Sorry. Anyhow, ignore the total. About 10, we think about 10,000 of them come to Oregon in the fall. But they also, their population is increasing, and we are seeing them expand their range and their numbers. And now California sea lions go all the way up to Alaska in their fall migration. But they also, we seem to see them pretty much year round now out at Cape Arago. The numbers go down in the spring when most of them move back down to the breeding colonies in Southern California. One of the things that we do see quite often in California sea lions is animals that look like this on the beach. They are, the population control in all of these pinnipeds, these seals and sea lions, is not predation. They do get eaten, but it's disease. They die from disease and old age. And one of the predominant diseases in particularly that we see in California sea lions is leptospirosis. It's a bacterial disease. It is transmissible to other mammals, so it's really important not to go, let the dog go sniff around these things. And it affects their kidneys, and so they just don't swim very well, and they come up on the beach. And it comes in cycles. There's years where where there's just lots of them all over the place. And one of the awkward things is they seek fresh water to drink. Because their kidneys are not working very well. Because normally they don't need to worry about that because they get all the water that they need from the fish they eat. They just turn that into metabolic water. But they tend to go for streams, and sometimes they'll swim up a stream. And I've seen them and had to deal with them like in some farmer's field and things, which is a nightmare. But as I say, this is a cyclical thing, and I point it out because people always will ask about it, or it's good to know, when we're in a cycle where it's the bacteria is sort of dominating the population. So that's the California sea lion. Stellar sea lions, they are bigger. Again, they have the sexual dimorphism. We have breeding populations here in Oregon. They live a reasonably long time, like all the pinnipeds. The mature males tend to disperse after breeding and go farther north. So a lot of what we see at Cape Arago are females and juveniles, because they tend not to, because she's feeding her pup, they tend to stay around the breeding colonies or in Oregon rather than moving north through the males. The pups are born mid-May to July, so unlikely to see small animals today, but as the season goes on, females will leave the breeding colonies and they'll haul out at Cape Arago. So you do see females with pups, some little small animals around. And this is one of the species that sometimes takes a long time to wean their animals. There's some that take 3 years to wean an animal. So they probably won't have pups in that second, they'll have a pup. In the second year they won't, but probably in the third year they will. And that's sometimes where you see two animals together. But that tends to be mostly in the breeding colony. We don't know much about, well, we do know a lot about what California sea lions eat, because when they hang out at the dams, we know they eat a lot of salmon. But when they're at Cape Arago, they're not eating salmon because they're eating other things. They may be eating some salmon. I mean, some fisherman has it on a hook behind his boat, pretty, easy to catch it. But so we don't, and there's no one in Oregon has done any work on what California sea lions eat in Oregon. But we know a lot about what Steller sea lions eat, again, because of the ability to go on the colonies and catch and pick up the sea lion poop. And they eat a lot of hake, or Pacific hake. It's one of the big things that's caught off of our coast here. They eat a lot of skates. Then they eat a lot of other things. I mean, but small, but primarily they hate the skates. One of the things you'll see at Cape Arago is that a number, I don't know if I should say a fair number, a number of these animals actually have been branded. So this has been for a number of reasons. In the California sea lions, it's been primarily because we have some nuisance animals at the dams. On the Columbia and on the Willamette, but also a number of animals, both the California sea lions and the Steller sea lions, were branded as young animals, pups, for population dynamics. To be able to look at, is the population growing, particularly in the Steller sea lions, because in the northern populations of Steller sea lions in Alaska have been in quite a decline. And we wanted to know in Oregon and Washington whether that was the case. Well, it doesn't appear to be. And so once an animal is branded, it's like a tattoo, it'll stay forever. And so you will see those animals sometimes. And if you can read the entire brand, and particularly if you can get a photo, Dave, do you take the information? Who takes the information for C?
Yeah, I'm sure you do.
Yeah.
Susan.
Yeah, so you can send ODFW the information, and they like to, get the information, but you need to be able to read the whole brand. So like this is C704, and if you can get a picture, it's even better. But so do you have anything about brands in your information kind of thing that you do? Mm-hmm. That you give out to people? We should get you some, because there's C is for something, I can't remember all the details, but just give Susan a call and get the information about it, connect you. Now, you don't have to remember all of this. This is the best thing that ever happened out there. There are 2 plaques right there where you pull up the car. This tells you a little bit about them. It gives you the pictures of what they're going to look like. And then the other one has all of this information, all of it, but quite a lot of this information I have told you today. So remember, you're going to know more if you're out there. You're going to know more than the person who's stepping out the car in 99% of the cases. And so if you can't remember, you just guide them over to the little thing saying there's these really nice things. And it's quite a lot of information because I actually wrote this stuff on this here. So don't forget that you don't have to be you don't have to keep it all in your head. Oops. So that's what you're going to see mostly at Cape Arago. I mean, that's when you go out there. That's the big stuff you're going to see. But you will have the chance to see other things. And so I'm going to go briefly through some of the other things that would be cool to know about. And the most common whale you're going to see are the gray whales. And they are they're close to shore. They're about 40 to 45 feet in length, and they're adults, so you can see them, they're decent size. And they're baleen whales. And you can see they're kind of all sort of scuzzy looking. They've got stuff growing all over them. And they have two things growing over them. They have barnacles, which actually stick on to the whale. And then they have these whale lice. They're not lice, they're arthropods, the same kind of things that you see, sandhopper type things. But they're very specific to this gray whale. And they are not, they're not stuck on, but they hang on. They've got horrible pointy little things that hang on. And the dead skin on the gray whale. But they're specific to the gray whale. You're going to be looking for this sort of bushy kind of blow. This is the exhalation of the animal. It's not hugely tall. It's kind of, it tends to be sort of dispersed a bit. And you're going to see them at different times. Most of the gray whales migrate from the Bering and Chukchi Seas down along the coasts of North America to their breeding grounds in Baja, California. So you're going to see them in December and January while they're going down, and in February and June when they're coming back. And that's the vast amount of the population. We do, however, have a group of animals that hangs out in Oregon, Washington, up through British Columbia, called the Pacific Coast Feeding Group. About 200 of them. And they don't go to Alaska. So unlike the Alaska ones, where the northern migration, you see young animals, then you get females, then you get the males, and then you get the slow females with the calves. But so you cannot really tell that in the spring, if you're seeing the Pacific Coast group, but by the time summer comes, you can be pretty sure the animals that you're seeing off of Oregon, Cape Arago, are part of this Pacific Coast feeding group. There's about 250 of them, we think. Both sexes, a little bit smaller than the ones that migrate north. And one of the interesting things is sometimes they show high site fidelity. So there are places in Oregon, and Depot Bay is one of them, where they hang around for a long time. Sometimes it happens at Cape Arago, but not always. And we think that actually there's instances, we know about this now for long enough, where you see females and their calves, and then you see the calves later. Because there's so few of them, you can tell individuals apart if you've been really good at looking at them, based on all of that kind of scuzzy stuff, or some kind of scar on them, or some kind of something weird about their tails and things. And we think that the residents, sometimes their site fidelity, the few instances we have, I should say, and their site fidelity may be maternally inherited, which makes sense. Mom comes here, she brings her calf, there's a good place to feed, then, the calf, I should go back there next year. They feed close to shore, in shallow water, like all gray whales. And they eat a lot of different things, primarily crustaceans. So around the kelp beds, which you'll see at Cape Arago, the kelp beds are places where these little shrimp-like animals called mysids live. And there's swarms of them. And when there's a big swarm of them, then gray whales like them. There's other larval forms, porcelain crab larvae sometimes come in huge swarms. And also there are some bottom dwelling amphipods that they will eat. But pretty much if they can find something that is in a big swarm, they will eat it, although they are not fish eaters. So you see them if there's a lot of food there. That's really when they get, because that's what they need to do. They need to eat. One of the things we've learned about gray whales in the last couple of years is their numbers are really going down. In 2016, it was estimated there's about 26,000 of them. In 2016, we would have been talking about they've recovered from the whaling. They're back in their numbers. Now they're about halved, we think. And this last season in Baja, they didn't see very many mother calf pairs. The numbers are really, and you can see that the calves that were born annually, often there was 1,000. Well, they didn't see very many. They saw about 85 mother calf pairs in the lagoons in Baja. So why is that? Well, it's probably a climate change thing. The vast majority of grey whales go to the Arctic to feed in the Bering and Chukchi seas. And they feed on, in that area, they feed on benthic amphipods. These are amphipods that live on the bottom in tubes, and you can go down and you can scoop up a whole host of them, filter out the sand, and you've got yourself a big mouthful of amphipods. These amphipods rely on the ice that grows underneath the algae during the summer because there's enough light for it, which then rains down onto the bottom, and that's what the amphipods eat. Well, we don't have as much ice as we used to. So with less ice, there's less algae, so there's fewer benthic amphipods. Going straight forward. And this is why we think that the number of grey whales is really reducing. You can see that black line there. That was the average ice extent in September, which is the lowest point of ice from 1981 to 2010. In September 2024, it was much less ice. So things are changing in the Arctic much faster than pretty much anywhere in the world in terms of climate change. So the number and we're seeing that this spring. I mean, if you followed along in some of the news articles, Washington has had a large number, a dozen or more dead grey whales washed up on the beach. We have that, and I think we've had a couple in Oregon. So yeah, this is an issue for grey whales, and we should pay attention and see if this continues. There are chances to see a few other whales. You can we see humpback whales off of Cape Aragorn. You see them when, again, there's a lot of food in the water, close to shore, and that's the animals will come to feed in those areas. You look for a black back, a larger blow than a grey whale, which is tricky if you haven't seen a lot of whales, because what's inside the difference, but it's like, oh, but you also look for the parts that it puts out of the water. It's flippers, right there, or the tails, because they do. They come to the surface, they breathe, they come to the surface, they breathe, they come to the surface, they breathe, they come to the surface, and when they dive, and they often put their flukes up when that happens. They come to feed on small fish and big groupings of a kind of shrimp-like thing called a euphausid, and they come primarily from the Mexican and the California population. So they come up here in the summer when the ocean is doing, it is productive and is growing a lot of fish and euphausids. Yeah, and here's they occur throughout the Pacific, and our populations come from the green in Mexico primarily, and we probably get a few from Central America, but the Mexican breeders are the ones that come up here, and then they return back to Mexico to breed. And if you're really lucky, you occasionally get blue whales. And blue whales are increasing in numbers. We're about 3,000 off the Pacific coast. And again, we see them in the summer when there's adequate food in Oregon. So they are baleen whales again. They feed on vast schools of euphausids, or which in the Southern Ocean we would call krill. And if there's a lot around, and sometimes they are close to shore. And this is what you look for. It's pretty obvious when you see a blue whale out there, because it's like, oh my goodness, what is that? It's so big. It is not a grey whale. It is, I mean, the blow really clues you in. But you have to spend a lot of time out there, or you have to be lucky. I just happened to be walking, 2 years ago, I was walking on the corridor for heads there, and it was like one swam just right there. It was like, that's a blue whale, like 80 feet long. It's like, oh my God. Okay. So then the other group of whales are the Adonises, the toothed whales. You're not going to see many toothed whales out there, but if you're really lucky, and who was out there last Sunday and saw them? No, I wasn't either. So they were out there. I heard reports of them. The killer whales. Okay, they are so obvious. I mean, it's just they don't look like anything else. They're black and white. The males have much larger fins than the females, and the young. And we're learning a lot about them because they are so distinctly colored that people who, and we now take tons of photos. So if you see them, take good photos. There's places you can send them off to, and they'll tell you if they've seen them before, they'll tell you all about them. There's 4 different sort of populations of them. They're probably all the same species. We don't really know that yet, but we're getting there. We know most about what we call the residents. Those are the ones that for most of the time are found in British Columbia and Washington waters. Although they do, in the winter, they do go down as far as Monterey, so you could see them off of here. Our most likely ones we see are what are now known as the bigs, or they used to be called the transients. They move around a lot, hence their name. And then there's 2 populations we don't know very much about. There's the offshores and then the truly oceanic ones. And they differ in their distribution, their social structure, they look different, they eat different things, and they make different noises. And the residents, they're so amazing, these animals. In the residents, the males and the females stay together their entire lives. They move together, they live together. This is such an unusual thing for an animal to do. Normally males go off, once they're adults. And these are the fish eaters. And they make a lot of noise because fish can't hear them. So, they can, it doesn't matter, they talk to each other, they make this like, come over here, there's fish over here. Contrast that to the transients, the big, which are the ones we see mostly. Marine mammals, they do eat little squid. They don't make a lot of noise because they're making noises that the seals and sea lions and the whales and the porpoises that they eat can hear. So they are sneaky. They only make noise when they really need to. And they have a slightly different social structure in that the males don't stay with the family grouping. So all of these animals have a matriarchal society where the female keeps her offspring with her, but so all her female offspring stay. In this case, the males will not necessarily always stay, but they often do come back to the family grouping. And then we don't know much about the offshores or the oceanics. We think that mainly because we occasionally get a dead one, and that the offshores eat sharks and fish, and the oceanic ones, marine mammals and turtles. But we probably want to see those. It's going to be the transients we see when we do. And they do come to Cape Aragon. They come in real close because there's a lot of seals and sea lions doing. They come into Coos Bay. They'll come in and eat the harbor seals in Coos Bay. I mean, this is the time of year to be looking for them. There was a very fortunate group eating dinner at the waterfront restaurant at Seven Devils, who saw them swim by last year. It's just luck. The more you look, the more you can likely to see them. Although there's a lot of looking sometimes when you don't see much. You often will hear from visitors, oh yes, I saw little baby killer whales when I was out fishing. It's like, no, you didn't. You saw Dall's porpoises. They're another little black and white thing, but they're only about 6 feet long. And they ride the bows of boats, which is why people see them. When a boat is going fast, then they like to ride the bow. And that's so, but you won't see those from land. You will see from land when it is very calm, these little porpoises, the harbor porpoises. They don't do anything very spectacular. They don't jump out of the water. They occur in small groups of anywhere from like 2 individuals to maybe 15, 20 individuals. But you know, they're 6 feet long and their dorsal fin's about this high. So it's got to be a calm day. But you do see them out there. You used to see them in Coos Bay. When I first came here, I would see them quite often. But I haven't seen one in Coos Bay for many years. But you do see them at Cape Arago now and again. And then, of course, we all look for sea otters. Not there yet. If you want to learn about sea otters, then sign up for the raft, the newsletter of the Alaka Alliance. This is the group that is working to bring sea otters back to Oregon. We're moving along, and both Scott and I are on the board of the Alaka Alliance. If you want to know more about it afterwards, come ask us. But they have a really good newsletter called The Raft that tells you all about what's going on with the hope to get sea otters back in Oregon. Marine mammals are protected, all of them, by the Marine Mammal Protection Act, which means that the act says that you cannot harass a marine mammal, you can't have a take, which means that, you know, you can't alter their behavior. So, that's one reason why the North Cove Cape Arago is closed to humans. Seal pups, we don't do anything in Oregon with them. We leave them, if they're on the beach, we leave them there regardless of what kind of state they're in. We let nature take its course for them. But if you do find, if people want to know about, you know, you can report live or dead stranded marine mammals. If it's a dead one, unless it's something interesting like an orca, a killer whale, or a big whale or something, we're probably going to leave it there and not do anything with it. But we do have a stranding network in Oregon, but primarily it's to deal with animals that are a problem or a very unusual animal. But I don't know if any of you remember the blue whale that came ashore dead maybe 6 or 8 years ago in down in Ophir, just south of us here. It will be back at the Hatfield Marine Science Center next week. So totally articulated, the whole skeleton. So that's going to be exciting to see that. Just to finish up, I'm just going to talk about some other things that you will see there that are not mammals. Black oyster catchers forage there year round. They also build their nests there. If you look carefully, you can see 2 eggs right there.
Oh, yeah.
And this one was obviously had 3 chicks. That must have been a good adult female and male that could raise those 2. And you'll see them at Cape Arago pretty much all the time. So those are cool, and they breed there. A few things breed on Shell Island on the actual rock. One of them is the pelagic cormorants. Some years there's more than others. And they are the cormorant that has the red around its face. They look really iridescent, and during the breeding season, they have that white flank patch. But they lose that during the non-breeding season. And they nest on cliffs. So they nest on the face of the rock at the back of Shell Island. And then there's a few western gulls that nest there as well. That's the western gulls are pretty. There are only breeding gull here on the coast of Oregon. That's what they look like. But of course, here's the chicks. The chicks hatch. They're very mobile after they've hatched. So if you look really carefully with the spotting scope, you can see them moving around sometimes on Shell Island. It's not that many of them that breed there. And I think sometimes the peregrine falcon and the eagles maybe reduce the population. If you're lucky, you see parrots feeding. Parrots go out, they forage, they feed on a variety of things, and then they come back to the colony or to the chicks, and then they regurgitate the food onto the ground, and the chicks pick it up and feed on it. Western gulls don't always look smart. with, gray and white. Takes them 4 years to get like that. And so you see them, these other two are young Western gulls. They're hard to tell, the gulls are hard to tell apart. But again, 99% of your people that you're talking about will not know about gulls. So you can talk about Western gulls and feel very confident that you're talking about. And then pigeon guillemots, I don't know, I see pigeon guillemots, there are a few of them that nest, not necessarily actually on the island, but you'll see them on the cliffs sometimes. They're crevice nesters, and they're just such cool animals. They have red feet, red bills, red inside their mouth. But they nest in crevices, so you don't see the chicks or anything. But what you do see is that they bring food, and pigeon guillemots do courtship behavior all summer. They're just kind of going around and pecking on each other and flying weird, and they're fun to watch. A few things that don't breed out there that you'll see. The bald eagles are pretty common this time of year because they come out to sit on the top of Shell Island and they wait for a harbor seal to give birth, and then they go down and they eat the afterbirth. And so you can see often a lot of juveniles. You'll see the adults out there, but it's often more the juveniles are out there. But they're also out there all year, but it's more common this time of year. And then you'll see brown pelicans flying by and sometimes roosting on the top of Shell Island. They're adults. The adults have a white head, a brown belly. The juveniles are the other way around. They have a brown head and a white belly. And some years you see more juveniles than others, depending. They breed down in Mexico and Southern California, and you see different numbers depending on how good the breeding is. And there are a lot of pelicans around this year. They came early. We've seen them in February and March, and there's a lot of juveniles. Coos Bay, the bottom of Coos Bay for a while there had hundreds of them. Some of them have moved on, but you'll see them flying by. And then not this time of year, but in the winter, if you go out there, this is a hot spot for harlequin ducks. Harlequin ducks breed inland in that sort of pink area there, up in rivers, but they come to the coast during the non-breeding season. So starting in, say, October through about March, you'll see these incredible colored males and these rather drab females out there. So they're well worth it for. And then you'll see a whole host of shorebirds, and I'm not going to go into shorebirds because shorebirds are really hard to tell apart. So I just put this in that if you see kind of little brown birds and flitting around, if you're good and you want to use the bird book, you can work out what they are. If not, you can just call them all shorebirds. And then finally, the other thing you'll see floating, if you were to look really closely, you'd see so many hundreds of inverts, but you'll on the surface, you'll see primarily this kelp, the bullwhip kelp. It's an alga, it's not a plant. And it is the base of the food web of many organisms that live out there. And the unusual thing, which is harder to see, but the unusual thing at Cape Arago, it's the only place in Oregon where it occurs, is the giant kelp. This is the Macrocystus. This is the giant kelp that's common in California. And there are two big patches of it at Cape Arago. One is behind the Shell Island, so you can't see it, and the other is to the south of it. And on a really calm day with the spotting scope, you can see the fronds of this on the water. But this is a unique thing about the North Cove of Cape Arago. We have the giant kelp there. And it's weird because if you go further north, there's a lot of giant kelp. In British Columbia, for example, and quite why we don't have it in other places in Oregon, I don't know, but we do have it there. So those are the sort of the two things that are not birds or mammals that you can see there. With that, I'm open for questions about anything I know.
So when I've been out, excuse me, to Shell Beach and there's an elephant seal, they throw sand on their backs.
They do. I forgot
Why
to
do they
mention
do
that.
that?
Oh, that's a very good question. And that is a very good, hard question to answer because they do it when it rains. The given answer is that the sand is wet And by doing that, they're putting wet things on their body so that, for thermoregulation, because they can't sweat. But they do it when it rains. I've seen them do it when it rains, and so, it's unclear. Hard to set up a research protocol to work out how long to be perfect on it, for that one. Yeah, I'm back there.
Do we know why blue whales are increasing in population?
Yes, one is that we harvested them, we whaled for them. And so they're just returning to numbers that they, would have had pre-whaling times. I mean, they used to bring whales in here into Coos Bay. I don't think blue whales, but, there are plenty, they harvested blue whales extensively. That's
So
really why.
climate change isn't affecting them?
No, I don't think it's a climate change thing for them, because for their increase. And so, the ocean, if there's lots of food in the ocean, then they do well. And sometimes we get good outline, and get good food. Yeah.
Back to elephant seals, is there a physiological reason for the proboscis?
Yeah, no, not physiological. That's how the male makes sound. That's his sound resonator. And so the bigger that is, the larger a sound he can make. And so the larger the sound, that's the first warning to a slightly subordinate male that, ooh, I probably should be careful here. Too close. You're gonna get nailed. Because they have really, if you go to the Marine Life Center, there's a skull of an elephant seal, and they have incredible teeth. I mean, and they have thick skin, but the younger males can really get hurt, but not careful. Yeah, funny.
The gestation period for the seals seems to be pretty short from what I can tell.
It's a year long.
What is a year?
Yeah, like lots of mammals, they have what's called delayed implantation. So the egg and the sperm get fertilized, it grows to a certain size, like a ball of cells, and then it just sits in the uterus, just sits there. And then something triggers, it's probably a day-length thing, it's hard, again, very hard to work that out. And then it implants and it starts growing again. But lots of mammals do that, so that you can keep on an annual cycle, because you don't wanna, like give birth in May one year, June the next year, then, for a 9-month gestation. So it's, the annual cycles are very common.
Are the elephant seals the only ones that molt?
No, every mammal molts. I mean, you're molting. Nothing great than that. But they are the only pinniped that does a drastic molt. Who do elk do a drastic molt? Do they kind of shed their skin? Don't they? I think so, yeah.
Is it, when it sounded like you said it took like a month and they're on the beach, are they all aggressive during that time?
No, they just.
If you try and step on them.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, they're like logs sometimes. I mean, literally, you're right, you've been up in the upper area. No, no, they're not aggressive at all. Elephant seals, I mean, if you got right up close to them, it would probably kind of raise its head and growl, but I'm not gonna, they don't know that. And the others. Yeah.
I got a couple quick ones. You mentioned about tagging seals. Do we tag seals here in Oregon? Is there
No,
plans?
that's more. We did, there was well, I shouldn't say that. If we had an elephant seal that survived, pup, ODFW might tag it, because we weren't interested. I don't know if they would now.
Yeah.
We did for a while. I mean, we were probably in the time I've been, the 20 over 25 years, we probably tagged 10 or 12 animals. We did tag harbor seals for a while when someone was doing a study, Jim Harvey from OSU, but that was probably 20 years ago too.
That goes to my second question. It seems like the other seals like migrate a lot, but harbor seals, are they just local? Do they not?
Yeah,
migrate like to Alaska?
that's a good question. No, they are quite localized. Now they will move from so I think. And I think we know this, because I think that, again, tagged animals told us that. It's one of the reasons I think they tagged them. They will go like to the umpqua, when the umpqua run some kind of small bait fish, that kind of thing. So they move around. That's right, yeah, Jim Harvey's study, he tagged harbor seal pups. This is all coming back to him. And he tagged a number of harbor seal pups up and down the coast. Most of them stayed, but a few of them, like, it's like they didn't read the book, you know. Like one went to California, one went up to Washington, that kind of thing. But these were young animals, and young animals tend to be more dispersal. But I'm pretty certain, when we see the same seals in Coos Bay that are pretty much the same seals. They don't move around, but everybody else migrates, yeah.
And then the last one, I mean, I surf, and so I will paddle and I'll see like a clump of stuff, but how do they differentiate seal poop? I mean, how do they find seal?
Oh, you go to the harbor, you don't find it in the water, you go
Oh,
to
you
where
don't?
they, no, you go to where they hold up.
Okay.
So at low tide, you walk out to, say, like, the place on the north strip where harbor seals are, and at low tide, they'll be hard, you can just go out with a little shovel and pick it up and put it in a plastic bag.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Experience.